mental discipline paradox. Why your greatest strength comes from what you don't do. Here's something nobody talks about when it comes to success. The most powerful people in the world aren't defined by what they do. They're defined by what they refuse to do. Think about that for a moment. While everyone's obsessing over productivity hacks and morning routines, the real secret hiding in plain sight is the ability to say no to your own mind. I know that sounds strange, maybe even impossible, but stick with me, because what I'm about to share will fundamentally change how you think about willpower, discipline, and the voice inside your head that's constantly sabotaging your best intentions. Let me paint you a picture. It's 6 in the morning, your alarm goes off, and in that exact moment, a war begins. One part of you knows you should get up, tackle the day, be productive. But there's another voice, isn't there? That seductive whisper saying 5 more minutes won't hurt. Just 5 minutes. And here's the thing that most people never realize. This isn't just about sleep. This exact same battle is happening dozens, maybe hundreds of times throughout your day. When you're angry and want to lash out. When you're anxious and want to avoid that difficult conversation. When you see that dessert and your diet plan suddenly seems negotiable. Your mind is constantly throwing thoughts, urges, and emotions at you like a tennis ball machine stuck on maximum speed. Now, ancient Buddhist philosophy, particularly in the teachings preserved in the Dhammapada, talks about the mind as something wild and untamed. The exact verse describes the mind as difficult to restrain, moving swiftly, landing wherever desire takes it. But here's the crucial part that gets lost in translation. The text doesn't say you should suppress the mind or pretend these thoughts don't exist. It says something far more nuanced. It says that a disciplined mind, a tamed mind, brings happiness. Not a controlled mind in the sense of rigid suppression, but a trained mind that you've learned to work with rather than against. Let me explain why this matters so much in our modern context. We live in a culture that glorifies authenticity and self-expression to an almost religious degree. Be yourself. Speak your truth. Let it all out. And while there's beauty in authenticity, there's a dangerous trap hidden in this thinking. Because if you express every thought that crosses your mind, every emotion that bubbles up, every impulse that strikes you, you don't become more authentic. You become erratic, unpredictable, and ultimately unsuccessful. The harsh reality is that successful people, and I mean truly successful, not just wealthy but fulfilled, have learned to create space between impulse and action, between feeling and expression. Think about someone you admire, someone who's achieved something remarkable. Now think about what they didn't do, the arguments they didn't start, the shortcuts they didn't take, the temptations they refused, the comfortable path they rejected. Their success isn't just built on positive actions. It's built on a foundation of disciplined restraint. They mastered something most people never even attempt. They learned to observe their own thoughts without immediately obeying them. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is where most advice about discipline completely misses the mark. People think discipline is about being hard on yourself, about grinding through discomfort, about forcing yourself to do things you hate. That's not discipline. That's just suffering with a productivity label slapped on it. Real mental discipline is actually about creating freedom. When you're controlled by every emotion, every craving, every fleeting thought, you're not free. You're a puppet. Your anger controls you. Your anxiety dictates your choices. Your cravings run your schedule. Mental discipline is about cutting those strings one by one until you're actually in the driver's seat of your own life. So how do we actually develop this? Because knowing you should have mental discipline and actually building it are two completely different things. The answer is surprisingly simple in concept but challenging in execution. Meditation. Now, before you roll your eyes and think I'm about to tell you to sit cross-legged and chant, hear me out. Meditation isn't mystical nonsense. It's strength training for your attention. When you sit down to meditate, even for just 5 minutes, you're practicing the single most important skill for mental discipline. Noticing your thoughts without immediately reacting to them. Here's what actually happens in those 5 minutes. You try to focus on your breath. Within seconds, your mind wanders. You notice it wandering. You gently bring it back. It wanders again. You bring it back again. This cycle might happen 20, 30, 50 times in 5 minutes. And every single time you notice your mind wandering and choose to redirect it, you're doing a repetition in the gym of mental discipline. You're literally rewiring the neural pathways that govern self-control. Research in neuroscience backs this up. Regular meditation physically changes the brain regions associated with attention regulation and emotional control. But meditation is just the foundation. The real practice happens in your daily life. In those moments when your mind is screaming at you to do something you know you shouldn't. When someone cuts you off in traffic and rage floods your system. When that text goes unanswered and anxiety starts spinning stories. When you're tired and every cell in your body is begging you to quit. These are your real training grounds. And here's the secret. You don't have to win every battle. You just have to notice that a battle is happening. The awareness itself is the beginning of discipline. Let's talk about anger specifically, because it's such a perfect example of how undisciplined thinking destroys lives. Someone says something that triggers you. Instantly, your mind serves up a devastating response. You can feel it right there, ready to launch. And our culture tells you that holding back is inauthentic, that you should express your feelings. But ask yourself, who does that serve? In that moment when you unleash your anger, you might feel a temporary sense of power, of release. But what comes after? Damaged relationships, regret, a reputation for being volatile. And here's what nobody tells you. Expressing anger doesn't release it. It reinforces it. Every time you give in to anger, you're strengthening that neural pathway, making it easier to get angry next time. You're literally training yourself to be an angrier person. The alternative isn't suppression. It's not about pretending you're not angry. It's about creating space. Notice the anger. Feel it in your body. Observe it like you're a scientist studying an interesting phenomenon. And then choose your response based on your values, not your emotions. That's mental discipline. That's freedom. And it comes from one simple practice. Not letting every thought that pops into your mind turn into an action. I want to address something important here because there's often confusion about this. Mental discipline isn't about becoming emotionless. It's not about turning yourself into some kind of robot who doesn't feel things. Emotions are data. They're signals. Anger tells you your boundaries have been crossed. Anxiety tells you something matters to you. Sadness tells you you've experienced loss. These are all valuable pieces of information. Mental discipline is about receiving that information without letting it hijack your behavior. It's the difference between feeling angry and acting angry, between noticing anxiety and being controlled by anxiety. Here's a practical framework you can use starting today. When a strong emotion or impulse arises, try this. First, name it. Literally say to yourself, silently or out loud, "This is anger," or "This is craving," or "This is fear." That simple act of labeling creates psychological distance. Second, locate it in your body. Where do you feel this emotion physically? Tightness in your chest, heat in your face, tension in your shoulders. This grounds you in physical sensation rather than mental story. Third, watch it change. Emotions are like weather. They shift and move and eventually pass. Notice how the sensation evolves over 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes. Finally, choose your response. Not based on the emotion, but based on who you want to be. The beautiful paradox of mental discipline is that the more you develop it, the less you need it. When you've trained your mind through consistent practice, the wild, reactive thoughts become less frequent. The voice telling you to hit snooze becomes quieter. The urge to lash out loses its intensity. You naturally begin making choices aligned with your deeper values because you've weakened those old, reactive pathways and strengthened new, intentional ones. It's like the difference between walking through an untamed jungle and walking down a well-maintained path. Both will get you to your destination, but one requires constant, effortful navigation, while the other becomes almost automatic. Here's what I want you to remember from our time together today. Your mind is not your enemy, but it's also not automatically your friend. It's a tool, an incredibly powerful tool, but one that requires training. Every successful person who has ever lived understood this at some level.
They knew that freedom doesn't come from doing whatever you feel like doing. It comes from the discipline to align your actions with your intentions. Start small. 5 minutes of meditation. 1 moment of pausing before reacting. 1 time choosing not to express that anger. These tiny practices accumulate into transformation. Your disciplined mind isn't just the path to success, it's the path to the kind of deep, lasting happiness that comes from knowing you're in control of your own life. And that's a gift worth working for.